Well, tonight we want to continue our examination of Jesus, the Master Teacher. We introduced this topic last week, and I'm sure all of us are indebted to those who have been our teachers through the years, and typically we kind of just relegate that to the education we received, and you can all think of a favorite teacher, and I told you without question who I have to put at the top of that list, my mother-in-law. She was my second grade teacher. And she says that she put me on the right track when I was in second grade, and that's why she allowed me to end up eventually marrying Amy. And I don't doubt that that's probably not true. So I'm thankful for her, but there are lots of others. And it's been the case just in the last few years that a lot of those individuals that impacted my life have started to depart this life. And that's a bittersweet moment. And I remember Miss Patsy Mahaney was her name. She was my fourth grade teacher at Gainesboro Elementary, and she passed away several years ago. And when I was working for Amy's dad as a funeral director, I was able to go to Nashville where her death occurred and pick her up. She was at the Alive Hospice Center, and they have a neat little ceremony where they drape a quilt, and all of the caretakers come out. Some of you that have worked in the medical field kind of know what I'm talking about. And I would say she and I had a conversation with her. Of course, she was not responsive on the hour drive back, but just some thanks that I was able to express. I had told her some of that, certainly before her death, but it was just good to kind of have that little time together. But you all have those teachers that impacted you, as do I. This question is one that we posed last week, and we'll keep posing it throughout the remainder of the quarter. Why is Jesus the Master Teacher? Why does he excel all others? Why is that true? And I know you have your reasons that you probably can think of, and I welcome you to share them. There have been a number of books written through the centuries. If you go back through historical writings, there is reference to the teaching methodologies of Jesus very early after the close of the New Testament. Some allusion to it, but then certainly in the centuries that followed, it became more concentrated or a more focused examination. And again, some of these works remain. Some of them are just allusions that we can pick up here and there. But people have been interested all through the years. Why is Jesus the Master Teacher? And of course, we're asking that question not just for informational purposes, but so that we ourselves might improve our teaching. And some of us might be quick to rebuff and say, well, I'm not a teacher. I'm not on the payroll of the Cumberland County School or Department of Education. That's not what I'm trying to do, but you are, whether you're a parent or a grandparent, an uncle or an aunt. If you're a Christian, you're a teacher because you are to have influence and be able, as Hebrews 5 verse 12 says, that by this time you ought to be teachers. But you need one to teach you again. So we won't all teach in the same way. We won't all be able to maybe teach in a public setting like this. You may be very skilled at teaching one-on-one. Some can excel in that environment, while in a public setting they would be very uncomfortable, and of course vice versa may be true. And some of you may have a hybrid experience or even all of those experiences, but all of us can teach. Tonight, I want to examine just two reasons. And certainly, again, there are many more, but tonight just two. One we cannot duplicate and one that we can try to imitate. Now, you may say, well, we can't duplicate it. Why look at it? Well, because it really serves somewhat as a foundational concept. And it's not a new one when I announce it in a moment that you're unfamiliar with, but it helps give us kind of a groundwork, if you will, to jump off from in looking at who Jesus is and how he did what he did. And there is one we can try to imitate and should. And it's really because of the first that we can try or make our attempt to imitate the second. And I want to again issue just one warning before we proceed further. I said this last week, and some of you were kind enough to say, yeah, you shouldn't have said that. So you'll probably say this to me tonight. There may be some offhanded, silly remark that runs through my brain that jumps out of my mouth before I think about it, about some aspect of teaching or some even teacher that I have or some educational concept that I'm critical of. And you might say, well, you shouldn't have said that, or you don't know what you're talking about, or that's not really how it works in that setting. So my disclaimer is this: forgive me for my foolishness, okay? Maybe that would be a good way to start most every class in some capacity, but forgive me for that, and we'll just go on through. I know you can't read that. That's much too small. I thought actually the print, they must have changed my background there. But anyway, you can't read that, but I'm going to read this to you. Some of you will recognize it, and if you don't, I'll tell you where it's from as we start. Now, when we think of Jesus as the master teacher, there is one caveat that has to be made, and I cannot make it better than this particular author did, so I'm just going to read his words verbatim. He said, "I'm trying here," and he's talking about Jesus, "trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him," in reference to Christ. Quote, "I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on a level with a man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. We are faced then with a frightening alternative. This man we are talking about either was and is just what he said, or else a lunatic or something worse. Now, it seems to me obvious that he was neither a lunatic nor a fiend, and consequently, however strange or terrifying or unlikely it may seem, I have to accept the view that he was and is God. God has landed on this enemy-occupied world in human form. Some of you recognize that quotation, but that's from C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity. If you've not read this volume, I would encourage you to do so. And I think Brother Bruce said he's recently picked this up to read it after consideration. I'm sure he and many of you who have would say there's a lot of good in here. Like any book that's other than this book, God's holy book, you eat the fish, you pick out the bones, so you might find a few bones here and there, but not nearly as many as you will with most authors, I'm convinced. But what Lewis is saying, I want to make sure, and I think you would know this even without my making this disclaimer, when we say Jesus is the greatest teacher, we're not just saying, okay, that's what makes him great and stopping there. We're saying that he is the Son of God. And because he is the Son of God, he's also naturally the greatest teacher. But today, again, many people just kind of put him in that box, and then they are free, or so they think, to dismiss him or to ignore him. He's a great moral teacher. And sometimes people will even say, you know, he belongs alongside of Moses. He belongs alongside of Buddha, Confucius, and maybe some others as great moral teachers through the ages, through the centuries of the world's history. That's not where we're putting Jesus in those sorts of categories. He is above all of them, of course, because he was much more than just a great moral teacher. He is the Christ. He is the Son of God. So that's the disclaimer we have to make here at the beginning. Why is Jesus the master teacher? Why does he excel them all? Here's the first point, and it's nothing earth-shattering in the sense of what you've not heard before you've heard it. Let's think about it tonight. Jesus never sinned. That's what makes him not just the greatest teacher that has ever lived, but that's what makes him the Son of God, the divine Son of God. He never sinned. Now, as I said, this is something we cannot duplicate. Have you ever given much thought, and I've tried to do this at different times through my life, and if you want to do the challenge of doing it tomorrow, just save it till tomorrow. But can you think of a day maybe at some point when maybe you're reflecting it was a good day and everything just kind of fell into place like it was supposed to? Every light was green. Everything just worked out the way you thought it should have worked out. And maybe you just kind of sit and are soaking in the grandeur of the day, and maybe something along this line says, this day was perfect. This day was perfect. I don't know if you've had days like that. I know you've had plenty of the other kind of days. Those of us that battled Knoxville traffic yesterday afternoon, that was an imperfect day, wasn't it? Because anytime we'd go about not even 5 miles, but sometimes even a shorter distance than that, there'd be a wreck or there'd be a construction site, and it was a headache just traveling going from point A to point B. Sometimes those days are like that. I wrote, and some of you got a lot of humor out of my escapades a couple of weeks ago when I spilled coffee on 2 separate pairs of pants. And I don't know why that happened. My coffee cup that I always put the same amount of coffee in it conspired against me that morning as I pulled out of the driveway. And so I went back in and changed, and I felt, a little flustered, but I was okay. And I got to work and hit the speed bump out here, and guess what? Happened again. And that time, see, I had a dark colored pair of pants on first, but I still changed. Guess what? I changed into khakis, but I didn't care. I was so mad. So the rest of the day, my khakis were browner in one location than they were the rest. So I know you don't want to know that. Some days are not perfect, but Jesus, he was perfect. His days were without sin. Hebrews 4, verse 15. We do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize. Beautiful word in the original language as it is even in our own. That is that he cannot feel together with our weaknesses. He was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Now, the crucial part of that verse is he can teach because he understands. And because he understands, then of course, his teaching has great weight because of the way in which he can present it. People ask, and it's a valid question, Jesus tempted in all points like as we are. How can that be possible when the modern world presents any number of temptations that first century Palestine would have known nothing about? What's a temptation we face today that Jesus never faced? Can you think of one? What do you think? I know you can think of some. Traffic. Yeah. Jesus probably didn't drink coffee either and put that in his, his camel didn't have a cup holder on it, I don't guess. We don't even know if Jesus rode a camel. It's likely he did, but probably he walked from point A to point B. What else? Jesus have to worry about what was on the television or an internet site that he was perusing, or whatever the case may be. You can fill in and think of some of the things that he did not deal with in the same exact way that we do. So what does the Hebrew writer mean? He was tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin. How would you explain that to someone? And I've even heard, I guess, in the most frequent usage of this sort of objection, I've heard individuals dealing with addiction, for instance. Jesus was never tempted to try crack cocaine, crystal meth, or even, smoke marijuana. An addict has said that. He doesn't understand me. He never faced that. Okay. Right.
We've never experienced that. So he was in some ways subject to temptation that we would not even be. He's subject to everything we're experiencing, exposed to, but in some ways he's exposed to things that we will never experience. We will never have the temptation.
The same intensity will never be ours, I guess is what you're saying as well, and that's absolutely right. Right.
You can boil it down and say, okay, I can take it. Okay, well, how am I thinking of it? Good, lust of the flesh, it's the eye. You're tempted the same way he was, or we're tempted the same way he was. It's different things, but if you boil it down, it's still the same thing.
It's the same. The devil hasn't evolved. His nature remains the same. God's nature remains the same, and thus human nature, we think, we're so much more advanced, civilized, cultured, whatever, than people were in days gone by. But in reality, there's little proof to back that up. And like Jim said, you can go even farther back than Jesus when Satan tempted Eve. You remember how he presented that temptation. and most of our English versions render it something along the lines is, has God indeed said? Did God really say? Another way it's translated there in Genesis 3. In other words, where God had put a period, that's a tree, it's off limits. The devil put a question mark and says, well, what about it? Did he really say that? Did he really mean that? And if so, what are the implications of that? Why is he holding back, that one thing? Does he really love you if he doesn't give you everything that's at his disposal? And to Brandon's point, that power that was there, and yeah, we can see it. I forgot, I did a sermon back when the lottery was, getting started here in this state, and subsequent to that, you look at the percentage of those like that win that enormous sum of money, and it's well over 75% of them that, within just a short period of time just make a mess of their lives completely, and they don't know how to handle it. And that's something, again, that Jesus possessed. We'll never be able to even contemplate the power that he possessed. There are other aspects of this, and it's interesting to speculate. I don't know that we can really drill down and say this is absolutely how he must have felt in that situation, but I think we can maybe speculate reasonably. For instance, does temptation typically, I don't know how to phrase it, does it typically build, maybe this gets back to that intensity question. We can say no, and then, we say no, and then we say no. Sometimes temptation, after saying no, the general rule of thumb is 21 days to make a new habit. So if you have tried whatever, to give up smoking, is it easier on the second day to say no or the 22nd day to say no? I don't know. I've never, tried to do that sort of thing, but I would imagine perhaps even the intensity of it continues to build. And yes, I was victorious yesterday. Yesterday, I overcame. I didn't give in to that particular temptation, but maybe the weight of that makes today's temptation all the stronger. And Jesus, for his entire life, kind of had to live with that building weight, if you will. But he was tempted in all points like as we are, yet without sin. He can understand. And we don't have it on screen, but the Hebrew writer goes on to say, because he himself has suffered, he is able to come to the aid or come to be a help to those who are tempted. And so we can come boldly to the throne of grace to find help in time of need. And that's a beautiful thought as well. Jesus never sinned. 2 Corinthians 5:21 tells us he was made sin for us. That doesn't mean he died as a sinner, but he paid the price. The penalty for our sin, God placed, of course, on Christ. But through him we can become the righteousness of God in him. 1 Peter 1, verse 19, Peter says we are redeemed. And it wasn't through animal sacrifice. It wasn't even through gold and silver. All of the things that the world attaches value to in order to make some sort of exchange. Jesus offered something far better, and of course that was his precious blood, as of a lamb without blemish and without spot. The Old Testament system demanded that as per the sacrifices that God told Moses to tell the people to give. It wasn't, you go over there and get Fluffy that's got one eye and two legs when he should have, 2 eyes and 4 legs and half an ear. You get your very best animal, your animal without any defects. And you give that which is best to God in sacrifice and trust him that he'll provide the rest. Here, Jesus is God's best. And it's interesting to think about that God never asks us to give up something, whatever we consider or even label as our best, that he does not promise to give us even something better in response. And clearly Jesus is that best that God has in store for us. The next chapter, 1 Peter 2:22, again about our Savior. He committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth. Some of the older versions use the word there for guile in his mouth. Not even what we might call a suspect word. Now, again, how this interplays, that is the deity of Christ with his humanity, we're not told. Philippians 2 is about the best we have. Who being in the form of God thought it not robbery to be equal with God, made himself of no reputation, taking the form of bondservant, coming in the likeness of man, became obedient unto death, even the death on the cross. The kenosis hymn, it's called, the emptying of himself. Well, he emptied himself, but he was still divine. How he restrained some aspects of that divinity, is somewhat of a mystery to us. How close did he get to sin? if we sometimes think of sin as a line, and sometimes we say, okay, that's the line. I can't go across the line, but okay, I'm still all right. I just don't picture Jesus, if we want to use that sort of analogy, going and saying, okay, that's sin. I'll see how close I can get to it. But how that interplayed his divinity, his humanity, with his behavior, with his mental, faculties. You remember how much emphasis Jesus placed on what we think. And he never sinned even in that regard. And I won't say most of us, all of us. I think if we're honest, and we have to be honest with ourselves, it's not what I say to you or you say to me, but being honest between our own ears, we know how much we struggle with that in whatever form it manifests itself, whether that's conceit or arrogance or lust or pride or whatever else, anger. I can appear on the outside that I'm happy, but inside I'm seething with anger. Jesus evidently even in those wonderful ways that our minds work, he always used his mind in a holy and righteous way. Hebrews 7 verse 26, here's where we get to the teaching part before we jump into the next part. He was that high priest, fitting for us. Again, that word, the idea in the original probably communicates more than our English versions can really capture. That is, he was what we needed, simply put. Fitting for us, proper. In other words, the only answer to the solution of sin. He is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and has become higher than the heavens. Now, here we have to be sure to make a distinction. Separate from sinners. Some have read and said, well, see, it didn't affect him in the same way. We could use, and there are a number of different ways to illustrate this in a physical human being sort of scenario. Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, those guys, that top the richest people, Mr. Musk, former president, or whoever you want to say, in that, strata of wealth, they've never, had to worry about finding enough money to live out the rest of the month. A lot of us, to probably varying degrees, you've had that experience where there's more month than money left. Have you been there? More month than money? And you say, well, what do I do now? How am I going to make it? Now, again, I'm certainly not trying to compare even the abundance we enjoy with this land with the deprivation and the scant, resources that many other places and peoples in the world deal with. It's even somewhat almost distasteful for us to think about what we complain about in comparison to others. We say we're not those guys, and then other peoples are looking at us and saying, well, but you eat every day and we don't. So I know the comparisons. When we say Jesus was separate from sinners, we're not saying, the Hebrew writer is not saying he has no identification with us. He's in a separate realm. He didn't go through life just floating on a cloud, even though he was among us. As you read the Gospels, you figure out he was hungry. He was tired. We're never told, but I would suspect even his physical body was susceptible to illness. There is great debate about that, and even about how he died, how the physical and spiritual kind of intermingle with each other in that event. It's philosophical, not really pertinent to this discussion, but nevertheless, he has become now higher than the heavens, but while here, he identified with us. Now that's important, simply for the fact that Jesus never sinned. So he's able to teach, he's able to communicate, he's able to know all that he tells us to do is the right thing to do, and in the right way, he did it. And that's why there is never a time or a place or an example that we can point to and say, yeah, but you failed here, or yeah, but that's not the way it should have been done. It just doesn't apply to Jesus in that way. Why is Jesus the master teacher? Number two, in the time left in the class, let's think about this. He practiced what he taught. Now you might be more familiar, he practiced what he preached. And that's true, he was a preacher, he was a teacher, but practice what you preach, or practice what you taught. If you say that others ought to do this or that, then do you. Maybe the best example of that sort of even line of questioning is found in Romans chapter 2. You remember in verse 21, after Paul has been somewhat kind of almost always, I won't say guns blazing, but maybe that's one way to describe his treatment of the Gentile world, the Roman, Greco-Roman culture of the first century. He excoriates them in chapter 1. And in chapter 2, the Jew, he can just kind of picture him as he's hearing this epistle being read, patting himself on the back and saying, well, I'm glad I'm not like those Gentiles. And so Paul said, you call yourself a Jew, you rest on the law, you're boasting in what God has done for you and what you do for God. Well, here's how he certainly brings his point home on sinfulness in their lives. You therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourself? That's a valid question, isn't it? Teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You make your boast in law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? And then verse 24, a quotation actually that, if I'm remembering correctly, Ezekiel the prophet had used in the Old Testament, but still valid for Paul's first century Roman audience as well as the 21st century Crossville audience. For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Christianity's got a bad name because of who? Christians. One author put it, and this is a more contemporary rendering, and he had a lot of pushback on this, but he said the trouble with Christianity is Christians. And I don't think he means to be a doom and gloom or a pessimist or, just a critic for the sake of being critical, but that's largely the case. The trouble with Christianity is Christians. The problem is not Jesus was inferior, but that we, by our actions and attitudes and behaviors, sometimes cause others to get that proverbial bad taste in their mouth. And, we need to be very aware of that and do what we can to try to avoid that particular outcome of events. 1 Peter 2:21, we read verse 22 a moment ago. He did not sin, no guile was found in his mouth. This is what preceded it. Peter said, unto this you were called. Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps. The word there for example is literally the word to write under. To write under. And our kindergarten teachers, and I guess you even do this maybe in first and second grade, they had to have me do it probably in eighth grade because my handwriting was so poor. But you remember the alphabet that went across the top of the page, and then below it, maybe at the start of each line, there was in little dashes, your A. And you were expected to what? Connect the little dashes and do that. And then you were to go across the line and you were to make your own little capital A and maybe lowercase a. And then you moved on to B, to write under. In other words, you follow the example. Teachers, what happens? The farther you get down the page, what happens to the student's writing? The worse or better it becomes. The worse. It becomes worse. Why? You're farther from the example. Should I tell you? Yeah, I'll tell you what I did. I would always try to get two pieces of paper, and I'd try to lay one on top of the other and kind of trace through. That's a little trick. I'll tell your kids how to do that too. But you can't read my writing. That's why I type everything. I type out, just about everything I write. But here, to write under. Why? Follow Jesus. Following his example. Now, what does that relate to in teaching? Well, we're talking about him as the master teacher. And as he did everything in a perfect way, even in his teaching, we're trying to follow him. We're trying to follow in his steps. We're trying to follow his example. And the way that he dealt with people, we want to deal with people. The question, and I think we asked this the last quarter, what is a disciple? You remember what the simple definition we gave for who a disciple is? One who follows. I mean, that's what the word means. And you remember that entire quarter of study was called Following Jesus. So, what are you? I'm a follower. I'm a follower of Jesus. Now, I know the word Christian, is an appropriate term to use. The disciples were called Christians first at Antioch, Acts 11:26. That was probably meant as a term of derision. You may have been called a term of derision. You may have been called a Campbellite, for instance, before. If you don't know what a Campbellite is, we'll tell you later if you're interested. But what are you? Well, I'm a disciple. Some people like to think of themselves as what I call hyphenated Christians. I'm a Christian this, or I'm a this sort of Christian. Just be a disciple, be a Christian, be a follower of Jesus. That's what He wants us to be. And that's what we ought to communicate in our teaching as well as in our living. Matthew 27, verse 4. Judas recognized this, albeit too late, unfortunately, it seems, to change the course of his life through his own free moral agency and will and choice. But I've sinned, he tells the Jewish religious establishment. I have betrayed innocent blood. Jesus is innocent. He's free from any charge. They don't care, of course. The money is thrown down. Judas takes his own life, and they buy a field to bury strangers. And you remember that, but he practiced what he taught. Now, what made Judas make that statement? I put that verse on the screen. What made Judas make that statement? I mean, I know there's some guilt there. Certainly that's a motivation in why he returned the money. Why do you think, though, Judas, what prompted him to say that? Okay, maybe he had recognized his jealousy, his desire for money, and that's led him to do what he did. I think it's his observance of seeing how Jesus interacted with those who came to arrest him and how they were treating him at that trial, and all the things that he had talked about as far as love for others and compassion. Did Judas know the power that Jesus possessed? Sure he did. He'd been following him for, we think, a minimum of 3, maybe closer to 4 years. Most people just kind of land in the middle and say 3.5 years. He had been, a front row spectator to the power of Jesus and what Jesus could do. A man, born blind, here's some mud pie, and that'll take care of it if you go wash in the pool of Siloam. Here's, someone dealing with a paralysis or paralyzing condition. Yeah, I can speak a word and cure that. Here's a woman who has tried to spend and did spend all of her money. Doctors didn't help her any, but just touching the cloak or the hem of his garment, that was enough, and she was healed. He had seen all of that. He had been there in the graveyard. We assume, no reason to think otherwise. Lazarus is already stinking, his sister said. Don't open that grave. Decomposition's nasty business. You don't have to be a funeral director to know that. But come forth. And Lazarus did. So Judas had observed all of that, and now they've arrested him. And right. It had to. And Judas is just one of those fascinating characters. Psychologically, I want to just try to dig in and see, some forensic analysis on that. And I don't know, but Doug's right. Jesus had told him what he was going to do. It's still his choice to do it, but he did it nevertheless. And yet he said, this man is innocent. And all of the teaching that he had done, all of the instruction that he had given to others, now Judas saw Jesus actually putting it into practice. If you're a parent, you've had this experience, I know. You've had one of your children, if they're of any age, Sue Ann's not old enough to do this to Josh yet, but she's coming, Josh, so we'll go ahead and warn you. When they're 5 or 6, they'll see you do something and they'll say, what? Not supposed to do that, Daddy. You don't use that word. Well, that hits you like, a ton of bricks in the gut. Even if it's not a 4-letter bad word. I remember one of the first times that I used the word stupid. S-T-U-P-I-D, stupid. And I said that, and, immediately I didn't know everyone brought them to church, but evidently they did. I saw all the pitchforks, come up in the pew. And they were marching toward the front. They were ready to, take me off stage left. And, you don't use a word like that. You don't say stuff like that. Our children, they're honest enough to see. You said not, and yet you are. Hey, the old monkey see, monkey do is right. Don't do as I say, or don't do as I do as I say. However that works itself out. Children are intelligent enough to figure out, that's not the way it's done, or it should not be. Judas says, this man said to live this way. This is how he said to treat his enemies. This is how he said to respond to mistreatment. And he did it. Now, again, what's that have to do with us? I'm not going to hopefully be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver or 300 pieces of silver or any other sum. I'm not going to have, a government desire my eradication by executing me for some stumped up charge. That's not going to happen to me or to you. But when you teach others, if you're teaching information, instruction does not match the way that you live, will you ever succeed? Probably not. Not in the long term, for sure. Pilate is no different, although coming at it from a completely different vantage point than did Judas. Pilate examines Jesus, scrutinizes him. We assume there is some debate historically about just how competent and capable Pilate was. If you want to dig into the history of all of that, some say he just, like, unfortunately, modern day politics, he had just bribed the right person, got into the ear of Caesar, and got this appointment as procurator of Judea. I find that a little difficult to believe because the Jews were such a cantankerous and temperamental bunch. They probably did actually need someone that had some, governmental ability and a way in which to, handle all of their conflicts with Rome that had been part of their history over the last basically about roughly 70 years. Rome had occupied Palestine. By the time Jesus and Pilate see each other, it's maybe closer to 80 or 100. But anyways, Pilate had examined Jesus. He had listened to different ones give testimony about him, and he said, I find no fault in this man. Whether that's just an admission as it lines up with Roman law and expectation, that had been issued by Caesar and the Roman Senate, or if he's incorporating, everything else, probably just within his jurisdiction, there's nothing in this guy that you're presenting to me that's, certainly a capital offense, and nothing even that would require further incarceration. I'm going to let him go. He practiced what he taught. Again, what impact that had on Pilate, you remember his wife has a dream. There's other things, other speculations about what played out afterwards in Pilate's life, but at least this encounter with Jesus, he recognized this is a man that, was genuine. Luke 23:14, he adds again, you have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. Indeed, having examined him in your presence, I find no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. There's just no evidence to back it up. And when we hopefully encounter people and we try to preach and teach them in our own lives, there must be, an awareness that we're opening ourselves up to scrutiny. And if people have known, or if it's been our past, to have lived in a way contrary to what we're teaching, we can just expect that people will have some, qualm with that. They'll want to tell us about that. They might want to expose even others. That's one of the favorite activities, it seems, of Christianity, the opponents of Christianity today, to just point at those who supposedly wear that name and fall. We're all guilty of sin. We're all subject to temptation. We all, again, make those mistakes. But people say, well, you say, that person says they're a Christian. Look at what they did. And oftentimes there's a high profile kind of falling from grace, even as we use that sort of language to describe this. So we need to be expecting that and be ready to respond. What I'm doing is I'm trying to teach you about Jesus. Yes, my life is imperfect. That's why I need the Savior. Yes, I sin. That's why I need a Savior. Yes, I stumble and fall. We're not asking you to follow me, even though I know 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. But what we're asking you to do is imitate Him. Follow Him. That's the example that we want you to take. Here's the last little point, and then the lesson will be yours. And some of you can probably already guess where I'm going with this particular question. One of both, what I think one of the things that probably that helped forge maybe a friendship between my dad and Amy's dad is that one of their favorite pastimes is just negotiating. They used another term about a certain group that's in the Bible. They like to Jew. Again, I know that's not a right way to say it now, but they enjoyed negotiating with car dealers. And Amy's dad, of course, my dad's gone, but Amy's dad still does. And with no intention to buy whatsoever, just to, go back and forth. Well, yeah, that's the car. What have you got it priced at? Well, will you take? No, and back and forth. Some of you might enjoy that too. Amy has some anxiety about it. I never do it right. I always, end up paying more than they actually told me what they'd take for it the first time. So we just go in and say, what's it cost? Okay, we'll take it. And maybe we get taken, the cleaners that way. But one of the things, one of my dad's favorite tactics, he'd take a guy and, we'd sit there for 15 minutes and banter back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then he'd maybe come off with this line, what do you drive, son? It always seemed there was, a younger guy than him actually doing the sales pitch. What do you drive, son? Oh, well, I was here to buy a Chevrolet. And you mean you drive a Dodge? I'm sorry, if you don't drive what you sell, I can't do business with you. And boy, to see, I wish that was back before we actually had either cell phones or cameras on their cell phones, but I would have liked to have captured. Some of those are burned in my imagery. That guy's face, he just kind of wilts. It's kind of like, the witch at the end of A Wizard of Oz. It just kind of melts into a puddle. He had invested all of that, and then he's been told, you don't drive the right car. In other words, if you believe in it, drive it. That's kind of the idea. Well, as it relates to Christianity, if you believe in it, live it, right? Will people ever be attracted to Christianity if I'm not living it? Will people ever be interested in following Jesus if I'm not in my life following Jesus? Now again, I know that you, like I, are am quick to say, but I don't do it perfectly. I don't do it, as well as I should. I understand that. I certainly am right there with you. But I'm trying, and I'm begging God to help me and to give me strength to help me to do better. And so that's what we think about as we think about Jesus, the master teacher. He is the Son of God. He is without sin. But he practiced what he preached. That is, that sinlessness came through. You and I will not be sinless. We cannot duplicate that. But we can imitate him in trying to practice what we teach and trying to help see. And oftentimes, and most of us might even have a story like this, an episode that we can recall. We tried to help someone. We, attempted to gain their interest in the gospel or in some aspect of studying the Bible with us, and they were dismissive. But maybe they observed in our life something that actually proved that we were living what we wanted to teach them, and it opens a door that wasn't open previously. Hopefully we were able to go in and then teach them the good news of the gospel. Well, thank you for your good attention this evening. Any questions as we conclude? Everyone's at the back and they're wanting to come in, but if you have one, we'll let you ask it very quickly. Jesus is the Son of God. He is our master teacher. Thank you for studying.